The massive iron sphere of worldly justice seemed to fracture into two distinct halves at the precise moment the obsidian silhouette of the machine tore away from the jagged lip of the asphalt and ascended into the bruised violet sky of a dying sunset. Inside the hermetically sealed cabin, the passage of time surrendered its usual cadence, becoming a thick and transparent amber in which 1,000 microscopic elements of their former lives were suspended for eternity. 5-year-old Maya hung upside down in her padded restraint, and her crystalline laughter rippled through the air, drowning out even the terminal groan of the tortured engine. Around her, like a frantic swarm of silver butterflies, circled 10,000 fragments of tempered glass, each reflecting a miniature sun in its sharp edges. To the child, this was not a descent into the maw of death, but rather the spectacular climax of the greatest amusement park ride ever promised by her father at the dawn of their long and weary odyssey. In her wide eyes was a gaze of pure wonder, while Julian, whose palms were etched with the pale scars of a professional life spent courting disaster, fought desperately to rewrite the laws of gravity one final time. He looked into the rearview mirror and saw not the sparks of joy, but the cold and calculated glare of the hunters whose heavy, armored vehicles breathed down their necks. He felt the frame of the car begin its lethal rotation, positioning its reinforced roll cage to take the impact, and he knew that this veteran maneuver would be either their absolute salvation or their final shared memory before the void. Everything began on the 14th of August during those pre-dawn hours when the city held its breath in anticipation of another sweltering day of late summer. That day was meant to be a simple triumph of quiet domesticity, but it became instead a point of no return for them both. An accidental detour through a forgotten industrial corridor led them to a gap in a rusted perimeter fence, where the girl became an unintentional witness to a tragedy hidden from the eyes of the law. She watched from her window as a man whose flawless smile and expensive tailored suit were symbols of absolute order on every television screen in the nation committed an act of darkness that betrayed every promise he had ever made to the public. A sudden flash and a sharp line of light extinguished a life in an instant, and in that same breath, the predatory gaze of that powerful face turned toward the solitary, idling car in the shadows of the warehouse. Julian, seated behind the steering wheel, understood the magnitude of the catastrophe long before his adversary could even process their presence. From that microsecond onward, their previous existence was utterly annihilated. Returning to their apartment in total darkness, he packed a single bag in under 7 minutes, knowing with a chill that their every digital movement was already being harvested by the city's shadows. He knelt before his daughter, and in a voice as soft as velvet, yet as firm as steel, he declared that they were now official recruits in the Order of the Great Secret Wayfarers. He improvised a code of conduct where silence was valued more than gold, and every turn of the wheel was a step in a global quest for hidden lands. The echoes that chased them through the city gates were renamed as the ceremonial fireworks of mountain spirits who simply did not want to surrender the secret map. They crossed the state line 2 hours later, armed with nothing but the will of a man who had made a career out of cheating death and the desperate desire to never let the freezing cold of reality reflect in the pure eyes of his child. 49 days passed in a feverish marathon across forgotten trails and logging roads, far removed from the watchful, mechanical eyes of the highways. The former master of precision driving converted every square inch of the terrain into a tactical chessboard. He learned to vanish into the landscape, using camouflage netting and changing the hide of his steel beast under the cover of midnight with simple cans of pigment and earth. Maya interpreted every hidden camp as an enchanting excursion into the wilderness, merrily helping her father coat the car doors in thick grey mud to match the shadows. To mask the reverberations of the distant pursuit, Julian used recordings of ancient folk tales, and soaring orchestral symphonies, turning the volume to its absolute peak when the silhouettes on the horizon grew dangerously long. He told her with a cinematic flourish that the black cars following them were the chariots of clumsy knights who had lost a fair race to him and were now merely trying to win a rematch through stubborn persistence. He deprived himself of sleep, existing on the razor edge of his biological limits, while maintaining a hypnotic focus on every shivering leaf in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. His skin became mapped with the cracks of exhaustion, and his mind transformed into a cold machine for calculating probability. On the 43rd night, their path was severed by a deep swamp, where freezing rain turned the soil into a treacherous slurry. Julian spent hours up to his waist in the mire, heaving their transport onto solid ground, while a silent drone circled like a vulture in the clouds above. He returned to the helm entirely spent, but at the sight of his waking daughter, he instantly donned the mask of the fearless hero, inviting her to share a breakfast of cold rations, which he described as the royal delicacies of the fog travelers. Every second of this artificial idyll cost him a decade of his life, but he continued his greatest performance, knowing that the fear of a child would attract ruin faster than any radio signal ever could. By the 82nd day, the paths had narrowed to a terminal thread, leading them toward the jagged white peaks where the mountains bit into a leaden sky. The system possessing the resources of an entire nation was slowly tightening its velvet noose, and on a steep switchback they saw the cold glint of a barricade ahead. Behind them rose the low thunder of heavy engines, belonging to mercenaries whose instructions were stripped of all ambiguity. No detour existed, and there remained only one scenario that, in the world of stunts, was called the impossible transition. Julian told his daughter to squeeze her eyes shut and imagine that their machine was about to sprout massive, invisible wings woven from concentrated sunlight. He compelled her to believe that they would now overcome the heavy grip of the world and glide across the profound gorge, straight into the promised valley of peace. With his heart hammering against his ribs, he accelerated toward the precipice, knowing that a single degree of error in his trajectory would mean an instant finale. The seconds of flight felt like 1,000 years of quiet contemplation, until the chassis collided with a sickening crunch against a narrow, rocky ledge on the opposite side of the chasm. Successfully skidding down the far slope, he hid their trajectory in a blossoming cloud of dust and snow that he had triggered as a deliberate distraction. When the mountain air finally cleared, the pursuers saw only an empty void and a howling abyss, assuming the fugitives had been interred beneath tons of shifting granite forever. Maya clapped her small hands, demanding he repeat the flight, while her father could barely unclench his fingers from the controls, feeling the silver of old age finally claiming his temples beneath the mountain moon. A quiet sanctuary appeared for them in the form of a crumbling stone observatory on a northern promontory where the land surrenders itself to the mercy of a gray and infinite ocean. This place was the final line in his secret journal, as here they were to wait for the only honest man of the press capable of launching the materials stored on the encrypted chip into the light of the world. The girls spent the afternoon gathering frosted seashells and arranging them into complex patterns on the wet sand, which Julian called magical runes, designed to summon the great rescue ship. The former stuntman allowed himself a single long gaze toward the horizon, clutching Maya's worn stuffed owl, in whose soft stuffing he had sewn the tiny digital board containing the echoes of August 14th. He was convinced he had won this protracted struggle, that his tactical brilliance and his architecture of white lies had preserved the fragile peace of the person he loved most. The air was filled with the rhythmic lament of gulls and the deep pulse of the surf when an elegant white silhouette of a vessel appeared in the misty haze. Julian rose, feeling hope for the first time in months, warming his battered heart like a long-forgotten sun. He was prepared to take the final step to hand over the symbol of their torment to safe hands and at last allow his daughter to exit the game.